The guests were still laughing when the sound of the church doors crashing open cut through the air like a blade. Conversation stopped. Forks and champagne flutes froze halfway to lips. And all at once, every head turned toward the aisle. She was standing there, the bride's mother. Not in the light blue dress she wore that morning, but in black. Her face unreadable. Her heels clicked on the marble floor as she walked forward, each step echoing louder than the last. The groom's smile faltered first. Then his hand slipped from the table, as if the weight of what was coming had already reached him. In her hands, she carried a small box, no larger than a cake tin. She didn't speak as she set it on the altar, the thud of it landing louder than any shout could have been. The groom's fingers trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside, photographs, dozens of them, each one frozen in time, stamped with the same date, the morning of the wedding, each one showing him and her, the mother of the bride, locked together in a way that made the crowd gasp. No one spoke. Not the priest, not the guests, not even the bride, who was standing now, veil hanging loosely over one shoulder, her gaze fixed on both of them. The only sound was the whisper of the mother's voice as she finally broke the silence. "You thought I wouldn't come back." Her words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and unmoving. The groom's eyes darted to the guests, as though searching for someone who might save him from what had just been set in motion. But no one moved. No one dared. The bride stayed perfectly still. Her hands were no longer clasped in front of her, but at her sides, fingers curling into the satin of her dress. She didn't blink as she stepped forward, her veil trailing behind her, catching slightly on the edge of a pew. The quiet in the room was unlike anything a wedding had ever known. The mother didn't turn toward her daughter. She didn't need to. Every photograph in that box was angled just enough for everyone to see the truth. Each one was an unshakable record of betrayal, timestamps seared into their corners like a final, undeniable judgment. The priest lowered his gaze to the floor, his hands tightening around the Bible he held. Somewhere in the back, a chair creaked as a guest leaned away from the scene, as though distance could protect them from it. The groom shut the box, but it was too late. The images had already burned themselves into the eyes of those who saw them. His breath came shallow now, his chest rising and falling as if every second in that church was cutting into him. The bride stopped 3 steps from the altar. She looked not at her mother, nor at the man she had been minutes away from calling her husband, but straight ahead, to the cross at the far end of the hall. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, even, the kind of calm that doesn't need to be raised to be heard. "You did this," she said. No accusation in her tone, just certainty. The words didn't rise or fall. They were simply placed into the space between them, and that was enough. The mother adjusted the hem of her dress and turned, just enough for the side of her face to catch the light. There was no shame there, no fear, only something unreadable, the kind of expression that told you she'd thought about this moment long before it happened. The bride's eyes flicked to the box. The groom followed her gaze and stepped back, as if an invisible barrier had just gone up between them. The bride did not look away from him when she asked her next question. Was it worth it? He didn't answer. The silence was his reply. In the pews, hands shifted uncomfortably. Rings turned on fingers. A cough broke the stillness for a moment, only to be swallowed again by the weight of what was unfolding. The bride's mother picked up the box once more, closed it, and held it against her side like something precious. She stepped away from the altar, but not toward the exit. Instead, she began to walk slowly down the aisle, each guest she passed shrinking into their seats, unsure whether to look at her or away. At the midpoint of the aisle, she stopped. She turned her head toward the crowd, her voice even, almost conversational, though every syllable was deliberate. "Now you all know." And then she kept walking, leaving behind a silence that didn't feel empty, but full of questions, of realizations, of the quiet collapse of every illusion that had been carefully built for this day. When the doors closed behind her, no one followed. Not the groom, not the bride, not a single guest. It was the bride who moved first. She stepped up to the altar, looked down at the man who had promised her forever, and simply said, "We're done." She turned, not toward the doors her mother had exited through, but toward a side hallway, disappearing into the shadows beyond it. The reception was never held. The flowers wilted on their tables, and the guests left with a story they would tell for years, though none would tell it the same way. Before we go further, stop. If your chest feels tight right now, if you're leaning closer to whatever screen you're on, that's your body telling you something. Hit like now so you can find your way back to this moment. Subscribe, because the deeper we go into this, the harder it becomes to unhear it. And in the comments, tell us where in the world you're watching from. We keep track, especially of the ones from places nobody expects. Before that box, before the doors, before the photographs, there was nothing strange about them. The bride, her name was Elise, 24 years old. She worked in a small flower shop on the corner of Maple and 3rd, loved coffee at sunrise and books she never finished. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday, even people she hadn't spoken to in years. The groom, Michael, 30, tall, clean-shaven, always with his shirt neatly pressed. He was polite in the way that makes you trust someone without thinking. And then, there was her mother, Marianne, elegant, measured in how she spoke, the kind of woman people described as composed, but never warm. She kept her hair in place with the same precision she used to keep the rest of her life. There was no reason for Elise to doubt either of them. For nearly a year, the three of them worked together on the wedding, picking tablecloths, tasting cakes, choosing between pale pink or cream flowers. And while Elise saw this as her mother being involved, Michael saw it as convenience. He said it made things easier, faster. But looking back, Elise would remember moments, small, almost invisible things, the way Michael's eyes sometimes stayed on Marianne a moment too long, the way Marianne would touch his arm in passing, lightly but deliberately, the way conversations would stop when she entered the room. At the time, Elise thought nothing of it, but she would remember. It happened the morning of the wedding. Elise had been in her dressing room since 7 a.m., her hair pinned up, her veil laid out carefully across the chair beside her. The air smelled of perfume and hairspray. Laughter from her bridesmaids echoed faintly from the hallway. She needed her mother. Just for a moment, a hug, a word of reassurance. She stepped into the hallway, the sound of her heels muffled by the carpet, passing room after room, and then she heard it. Not laughter, not conversation, something softer, breathless. A voice she knew too well, her mother's. The door to the side reception room was slightly ajar. Elise pushed it open, and there they were. Marianne's hands on Michael's chest, his fingers tangled in her hair, their faces too close to be explained. Michael froze first, his eyes widening as if caught by a light too bright to bear. Marianne turned slowly, her lips parting, but no words coming out. Elise didn't scream, she didn't speak. She simply stepped back, letting the door swing shut between them. She returned to her dressing room without a sound. Her bridesmaids would later say she was quieter than usual, but they thought it was nerves. It wasn't. If that was your daughter, your sister, who would speak for her? Subscribe, so stories like this are never erased. And if you're one of those who thinks, "I'll pass," then go to the comments. Tell us why you can watch this, and still stay silent. The minutes after Elise closed that door did not pass quickly. They stretched, each second pulling itself longer than the one before. In her dressing room, the lace of her gown scratched lightly against her skin. She didn't feel it. She was somewhere else. She could hear voices in the hall, guests beginning to arrive, shoes tapping against tile, the faint clink of glass from the reception area. Somewhere, her mother was laughing. Somewhere, Michael was adjusting his tie. Elise's reflection in the mirror didn't match the weight in her chest. Her face was calm, too calm. Her maid of honor asked if she wanted water. Elise shook her head. Another bridesmaid joked about her game face for the ceremony. Elise almost smiled. Almost. Outside, the weather was perfect. Sunlight through stained glass painted the church walls in soft colors. But inside Elise's mind, something had shifted. A thought had settled in, sharp and unmoving. This day will not end the way they think it will. She fixed her veil. She adjusted her earrings. And she waited. Every minute she could have stopped it. But she didn't. Would you have waited? Subscribe now, or admit you'd rather not know what came next. And don't forget, tell us where you're watching from. The organ began to play. Guests rose. Elise stepped into the aisle, bouquet in hand, the murmur of whispers dying into silence as all eyes turned toward her. Michael stood at the altar, his smile fixed, but his shoulders tense. Marianne was in the front row, her dress immaculate, her expression unreadable. Step by step, Elise moved forward, her eyes never leaving Michael's. There was no tremble in her hands, no flicker of uncertainty. When she reached him, he took her hand, but she didn't squeeze back. The officiant began the vows. Words about love, trust, and forever filled the air, none of which Elise truly heard. Then came the moment. You may kiss the bride. Michael leaned in. Elise turned her head away. Gasps rippled through the room. She smiled faintly, not at him, but at something only she seemed to understand. Without a word, she stepped back from the altar, handed her bouquet to the maid of honor, and walked down the aisle alone. Guests murmured, shifting in their seats. Michael glanced toward Marianne, who avoided his gaze entirely. Elise disappeared through the side door of the church. The side door closed behind her, leaving the ceremony suspended in an uneasy quiet. The officiant cleared his throat, unsure whether to continue. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes darting between the groom and the empty space where the bride had been standing. Minutes passed. No one knew if they were supposed to stay seated or leave. Then the sound came. Footsteps. Slow, steady, echoing through the hall from the main entrance. The church doors opened, not in the gentle way you push them for a latecomer, but with the force of someone who didn't care if they startled the world on the other side. Elise stepped in. But she was not the Elise who had walked down the aisle minutes earlier. Her hair, once neatly pinned, now hung loose around her shoulders. Her veil was gone. The hem of her dress showed faint marks where it had brushed the pavement outside. In her hands, a box, small, plain, wooden. She held it with both hands, her grip firm, as though whatever was inside might try to escape. She walked the aisle again, but this time the eyes on her were not admiring. They were wide, searching, bracing. When she reached the altar, she did not look at Michael first. She looked at her mother. Marianne's posture stiffened, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. Elise turned to Michael. He didn't move. She placed the box on the altar. The thud it made against the polished wood seemed louder than the organ had moments before. Open it. Michael's fingers hovered over the lid, hesitating. Then he lifted it. Inside, photographs. Dozens of them, edges still crisp, each stamped with the same date and time. That morning, every image, him and Marianne, in the reception room, in the hallway, in each other's arms. Gasps broke from the pews. Someone covered their mouth. Another muttered something under their breath, too quiet to catch. Michael's jaw clenched. Marianne's eyes darted toward the nearest exit. Elise didn't speak until every person in the room had seen the truth for themselves. Now you all know, she said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering, and then she stepped back, leaving the box exactly where it was. Truth has a way of tearing through the strongest walls. Subscribing is your way of standing with it. Or stay quiet. Let it pass. But if you're not okay with that, tell us where you're watching from. For a moment, no one moved. The photographs lay scattered across the altar where Michael had tried, and failed, to gather them back into the box. The priest stepped back, his hands lowering the Bible to his side as though its presence here no longer made sense. The first voice to break the silence came from the third pew. An older man muttered something sharp, not quite under his breath, about shame and disgrace. Then another voice, higher, urgent, told him to hush. From there the room fractured. Whispers turned to murmurs. Murmurs turned to arguments. Some guests turned toward Marianne with looks of disgust. Others stared at Michael, shaking their heads. One woman rose from her seat and began collecting her things, muttering that she wouldn't stay for this. Michael's best man reached out to him, but Michael stepped away, his eyes darting between the doors and the growing storm in the pews. Marianne stood, her back straight, her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't defend herself. She didn't speak at all. Her silence was not the silence of guilt. It was something colder, something that said the truth, now out in the open, no longer needed her permission to exist. Elise remained by the altar, unmoving. She didn't watch Michael, and she didn't watch her mother, her eyes fixed somewhere in the middle distance, as if she was already beyond this moment, already past them both. A man near the back began filming. He wasn't discreet. The glow of his phone lit his face as he adjusted the angle to catch Elise, the box, and the chaos spilling across the front rows. Someone hissed at him to stop, but he didn't. The video would be online within hours. Michael finally spoke. His voice cracked at the edges, low but carrying enough weight to hush the nearest whispers. "We can explain." Elise turned to face him, and with just 2 words, she ended the sentence he hadn't finished. "We're done." No shout, no venom, just the kind of finality that cannot be argued with. Michael's shoulders dropped. He looked at her as if there was more he wanted to say, but whatever it was, it stayed locked behind his teeth. Marianne's gaze flickered toward her daughter, then away, as though looking for even a fragment of connection she might still claim. She found none. Elise turned, stepping down from the altar. She didn't look back, not at him, not at her, not at the church filled with guests who had come for a wedding and would leave with something else entirely. Some stories find you for a reason. If this one did, hit subscribe before you leave. If not, explain in the comments why you'd rather walk away from the truth. And tell us, where are you from? The doors closed behind Elise with a low, final sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Outside, the afternoon sun was still bright, the sky still blue, the world still moving, unaware of the collapse that had just taken place inside the church. She didn't run, she didn't cry, she simply walked, the train of her dress dragging slightly across the pavement as she made her way toward the edge of the parking lot. Behind her, muffled through the heavy wooden doors, voices rose and fell, Michael calling after someone, Marianne saying nothing, guests trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. Elise didn't turn back, not once. In the weeks that followed, the photographs became more than evidence. They became a story that moved from whispers to headlines. Michael left town. No one could say for sure where he went, though someone claimed to have seen him in a small bar 3 states away, sitting alone with a drink untouched in front of him. Marianne stayed. She was seen less often, and when she was, it was usually alone. The composure she once wore so effortlessly now seemed heavier. And Elise, she disappeared from public life. No social media updates, no public statements, just gone. Some said she moved to a coastal town where she worked quietly in a small bookshop. Others believed she left the country entirely. But the truth, only she knows, and maybe that's the way she wanted it. So, what really happened that day? Was it a moment of weakness between 2 people who should have known better? Or was it something deeper, a betrayal years in the making, finally dragged into the light? Comment your theory below, and if you've made it this far and haven't subscribed, That says more about you than it does about us. Hit the red button. You're already here. If you won't, go to the comments, type exactly why, and tell us, where in the world are you watching this from?